Hi, everybody. I'm Melanie Marie Boyer, the Executive Director of the Pittsburgh Metropolitan Area Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And I have to tell you that today I am really excited for our guest. We're going to be speaking with Rachel Brink. She is an investor, a founder, a CMO, a board member, and a top Latina in tech. Rachel, welcome.
Hi, very excited to be here.
We are so excited to have you. There are so many amazing things that I want to talk to you about. So we're just going to go ahead and dive right in.
Let's do it.
So let's start by, why don't you tell us a little bit about your Hispanic heritage?
So I am a Cuban Costa Rican with a Dutch last name. So people are always thrown by the Brink, but both of my parents are Cuban. They immigrated right when Castro came to the States. Are very thankful that they were able to get an education in the States. And then my dad got a job offer. So that's how I ended up in Costa Rica. And then I came to the States for college and, never left. So I definitely have, and I'm married to a Venezuelan. So I definitely feel like I have a big connection to the Latino community, not just from where I was born, but where my parents were born, who I'm married to. So definitely feel very Latina in different ways. I lost your sound.
Is English your first language or your second language?
Second language. So I always joke that every once in a while I have like the Gloria Stefan accent, like a couple of words here and there that sound a little funny, but I kind of embrace it at this point in my life.
Well, we love it over here at the Hispanic Chamber. It's very normal for us. But when you first moved here and you started working, did that feel like a barrier for you?
Well, I think that you do have to, understand the cultural nuances and the way things are done. I think that, I grew up in Costa Rica. We kiss hello, everybody. That didn't go so well with the Americans, right? I speak with my hands. And there are certain things that I've learned to just embrace on who I am. And that there's things that you learn to adjust a little bit in the environment. But I do think that I've always been very proud of being Latina and definitely have had experiences where people are like, the reality is, not everybody is as open. And so you face challenges and how you address them, how you adjust them, how you move through them, I think is really defining of who you are.
I couldn't agree more. Do you want to tell us about maybe one of your biggest challenges you've had as an immigrant in your corporate career? And then we'll talk about what your corporate career was.
So interestingly, one of my biggest challenges is that, when I came here, I'll never forget, I was working for a large corporation and I was working for the Latin American division. And then when I wanted to work for the US division, my boss was like, well, your name is Rachel Tenberg, so I think you'll get the job. Because if it was Rachel Perez, I'm not so sure. And oh my God, that stuck in my brain. It's the challenges that you face. And I'm the type of person who is very proud of her heritage, very proud of who she is. But I do think that the challenges are there and we have to accept them.
Sorry about that. I think it's twofold as well. As a woman and as a Latina, it gets difficult. So let's talk a little bit first. For those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about, what you went to school for and how you started in your corporate career.
Sure. So I went to school in Boston. I had, thought Boston was, such a great school environment. I went to Babson College. And, from a very young age, I was always very excited about entrepreneurship. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship because there's no way I would have done it otherwise. And worked all my way through college, figuring out, different jobs, anything from babysitting to working for Merrill Lynch. I did it all. And then when I graduated, I got a couple of job offers, but the one that was most exciting was working for Gillette. And the reason it was exciting is because I always knew I wanted a career on the consumer side. I love working on tangible products. I love understanding what drives consumers. And so, when the opportunity came, I was, excited to jump on board. And that was my first job. As I said, I was working on the Latin American side. And then my second job with Gillette was doing Hispanic marketing, was understanding the Latino market. And I think what was really interesting for me is just, we used to call it el idioma común que nos separa, which means the common language that separates us, and how, as Latinos, we have a joint identity, but there are also so many nuances. Even silly things like, how do you translate razor into Spanish? Afeitadora, rasuradora, máquina de afeitar. I mean, those are all grammatically correct, but depends where you're from, you might translate it one way or another. So even learning through those was a really interesting experience for me on sort of the power of the Latino community, but also how challenging it is for marketers to address us.
Oh, that is something that I really want to talk to you about. So that is one of the most popular questions that we get. How do you market to the Hispanic community? And even saying Hispanic, when I see that, companies are like, should I say Hispanic? Should I say Latinx? Should I say this? Should I say that? I have my opinions on that, and I'm very level about it, but I want to hear what you think. And then again, how to reach the Hispanic market in your opinion.
So first of all, I think it's very interesting. I just read a Pew study that was talking about Latinx, and it basically said that only about 3% of Latinos have even heard the term Latinx. So it's like very hot on the corporate side and the techie side, but like the community has never used this. This is, and I've written tweets about it, and I think that the challenge is like Spanish is a language that has gender. I mean, el teléfono, the phone is a boy, and la luz. Why? Because that's just, it's the syntax of the language. And so it's a little bit tricky because we have sort of our cultural nuances, but it is what it is. So, when I think about how do you market to the Latino community or Latinx, whatever you want to call it, I think for me, the biggest thing is authenticity and consistency. What I see a lot of brands doing is sort of that in and out of like, oh, it's Hispanic Heritage Month, let's just do a couple of things and that's that. Or, they'll do one thing and make it very Mexican or very Puerto Rican. And I think part of it is not having diverse teams on their marketing side, people who understand, you have to understand the differences and accentuate the similarities, right? Accentuate the values that matter to the community and be constant for them. I think like any other community, they see right through the BS. And so I think that there is a piece about authenticity, about consistency of messaging, about being present in the community, where it's not just a one-shot deal and you expect, that's it. You do one thing for Hispanic Heritage Month and you expect them to be loyal customers. That's not how it works in any market.
Yes, no checking the box. Checking the box does not work. Don't get me wrong, especially on the nonprofit side. Like, we want your money. We want these initiatives. We want to give you the education, but let's do it all the time, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's like, you have to commit. You have to say, look, I will be there for this community and I want them to be there for me. But it can't just be like a flash in the pan. It's not a long-term impact.
So tell me your opinion of why companies should care about the Latinx market.
Well, I think it starts with the numbers. The numbers are staggering. There are 62 million Latinos in the United States. The purchasing power of Latinos, and I'm blanking on the number, but it's actually larger than the entire GDP of Spain, Australia, or Mexico. So these are very big numbers. These are very large communities. I think that's number one. I think number two, which I think people, the census data was just released, and they showed a huge jump in the percentage of the population that is Hispanics. And Hispanics are the largest minority by far. I think it's 18% of the population. The next sort of minority, African Americans, is only 12%. So I think, people underestimate just how large this community is. And the part that I find is most fascinating is that if you look specifically at Gen Z, if you look at who's coming down, who's the next generation of consumers, who's the next generation of workers or buyers of healthcare, of technology, they're 30% Latino. So this is a very, very strong, important constituency in the United States. And what I would say is, as well as just sheer numbers and purchasing power and how much of the economy they're going to control, is the fact that, the attitudes towards our Latinidad, right, of who we are, have changed a lot. Whereas older generations might have pushed very hard for their kids to be assimilated and didn't even want their kids to speak Spanish. We live in a very different world where I am 100% American and 100% Latina, and I feel very comfortable in both worlds, right? And I don't want to give up one for the other. I want to live in both. I want my children to live in both. So I think there's just a very different world that's emerging, and I think the impact of Latinos will be felt even more in the next generation.
I am so happy to hear you say that, because that is something that I say all the time. People are like, oh, well, you're half and half. I'm like, no, I'm 100% of both. Like,
Absolutely.
why do I have to be any less than the next person? So that's so beautiful to hear. And, like you said, growing in culture, it's just such a beautiful thing for people to be connecting with, their roots and their foundation. I love it.
And I think it's a real positive that, I think, I'm a Gen Xer, right? But I think there's something really exciting that's happened with millennials and even more with Gen Z, that, they're so vocal. They're so like, yes, this is how I feel. This is who I am. And they're the sort of embracing of diversity of all the beautiful things that we are. I think it's great. And I think it's a good change that's happening. And I think it'll make for a better society for everyone.
I agree. And especially on the level that how diversity and inclusion done right can help companies' bottom lines. Can you talk a little bit about why diversity makes companies more profitable?
Well, I think there's a lot of research around how diverse teams perform better. I think there was a study from Harvard Business School where diverse teams return a 30% 30% better returns on investment from Fortune 500 companies. And I think you see it across the board. You see it in public companies, you see it in private companies. And I think what's important to think about is, diversity means a lot of things, right? It means gender diversity, it means ethnic diversity, it means age diversity, it means experience diversity. If you think about it, if you have the more perspective, the more brain power you can bring around a table, the more successful your company would be. And, just in venture capital alone, Forbes magazine calculated that $4.1 trillion are missed because venture capital misses out on the opportunity of diverse founders. So I think it's something that goes across every sort of vector of the economy. And there's a lot of value to be realized. I think it is, it's sure we all want to do what's right, but businesses are businesses and they're driven economically. And what you see is there is such opportunity to add more value to the economy by creating a more diverse economy.
I could not have said that better. I think there's so much untapped talent. And actually, even on the other side, on the investor side, I have a friend, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Next Act Fund. Yeah. Yvonne Campos, she said when she was first looking to start, she was asking women, well, why aren't you investing? I know that you have the funds. And they just said, nobody ever asked us. So the talent is out there, the funds are out there. It's just in this untapped market, and one of them is women, of course. But let's talk a little bit before we get to the VC side. Let's talk about the founder side. So what in your life and when did your entrepreneurial spirit really take hold? Because you were in corporate for, a little while. So tell us about that transition. What piqued your interest?
So it's interesting because I always joke that I'm really a fisherman's daughter because my dad was in the seafood business. So my dad was always an entrepreneur. And I always knew I'd start a business, but life happens for a lot of people. I graduated college, I got a job, I got another job, I did my M.B.A, I got more jobs. Next thing I know, it had been almost 15 years that I had been working in, building these billion-dollar brands for Estee Lauder and L'Oreal. And it was a wonderful formative experience, but I always knew I wanted to start something. So in 2014, I started to think about technology and how how you could use technology to sell better. That was really sort of the impetus that was in my mind. I met my co-founders and we started Scentbird, which is a subscription service for fragrances. We were backed by Y Combinator, ended up raising $29 million. And, some of the statistics that I always like to share just to frame it in like how unique that experience was, is I am one of 90 Latinas that's ever raised over $1 million. $1 million in fundraising isn't that much, actually. I am one of 56 Latinas that's ever been funded for US companies by Y Combinator. So, I look at these numbers and they're so small. There's so much opportunity there.
I had to mute for a minute because my kids ran in, but that is tremendous. I had no idea. Over $1 million. $1 million is not a lot. I did not know it was so low. Do you want to just repeat that really quick, that statistic?
Sure. So this comes from Project Diane, and it's 90 Latinas have ever raised over $1 million in venture capital.
That is, wow. Well, that's really saying something. We need to break that barrier. So 29 million. So I know we've got a lot of very small businesses watching, a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs. So maybe people don't know what Y Combinator is, and they don't know what it means to raise 29 million. So let's start with Y Combinator. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it for those who aren't familiar?
Sure. So, I'm happy to talk about Y Combinator and venture. I think the first thing I would actually say is I think venture capital is not for every business. And I think that, there are many ways to build successful businesses and many ways to build great, profitable businesses that can provide a great life or that can be billion-dollar businesses. And so, before you kind of jump into that road, I always like to caveat it with that because I don't think there's only one answer. Y Combinator is what's called an accelerator, which means they invest at a pretty early stage in a business. So usually when the company has not raised any outside capital or very little outside capital, but they have a big idea, they have a great team. And what it does is it gives you huge, advice. It's a 12-week program. They also have some free training programs that are fantastic. The Y Combinator Startup School is something I encourage. Even if you're not part of the program, you can learn a lot from the Y Combinator Startup School. And so we did it in 2015. And they've just had incredibly successful companies come out of the program, including Airbnb, Dropbox, Coinbase, et cetera. But it's really, a program, they give you a little money, but it's really about the exposure. And then you're able to have sort of that stamp approval to continue to fundraise.
That was a wonderful description. And for those of you who aren't familiar, I would highly suggest looking it up. Like Rachel said, there's so much that you can learn even without being in the program, even just following them on the different social media. You can learn every day. So 29 million, I know to our small businesses, specifically in my chamber, we've had businesses raising for their liquor license and people were like, oh, that's 80,000. That's a lot of money, and really when larger companies or companies that aren't minority companies look at these numbers, they're not saying the same thing. They're not saying, oh, that's a lot of money. So why don't we talk a little bit, tell us about your experience with those dollar amounts and as a founder, getting into those, where those dollars go and how to raise them. Keep in mind that a lot of our audience is not familiar with venture. So you might have to explain a little bit extra.
Sure. So I think, first of all, we didn't raise it all at once, right? So that's one thing. People see these big numbers. So I think that, as I said, I think those are big numbers, but you also have to understand that then you're committing to a high valuation into a very big business. So, the first thing I will talk about is like, who is VC for? Who is venture capital for? And the first thing you have to think about is the scalability of your business. Can you be a business that can get to 100 million? Now, truth be told, you could be a business that sells $1 or $2 million a year and it's very profitable and it's a great business. And so that's where I always think it's important, like you're saying, if you're raising for a liquor license, you might have a very profitable liquor store and that might be a great business. It might not be right for venture, but that doesn't mean it's not a great business. So I think that there's a lot of like education that needs to happen around the types of businesses that are likely to get raised. Why do people raise venture capital? The number one reason is you need money to grow. Most investors want to see that you're a great team, that you're looking at an interesting market, an interesting problem that hasn't been solved before. And they want to see that you're starting to have some traction. They want to see that you're starting to what they call product market fit, which just means somebody wants this. You're able to sell this thing. And so, when you have that, the argument you're making is, hey, I am selling so many of these red pens. There are so many people that want them. But if we could raise a little more money, we could use that money for marketing. We could use that money to create better operations. We could use that money to hire more salespeople. And that's what's going to allow us to build a business. So, that's, I think, very important in terms of the funding is, what are you going to use it for? And are you the right type of business to use it?
So at what point, I know, so being a founder, you came all the way around from being a founder, raising the capital that you needed to grow and scale your business to now coming back into venture. Let's talk about that transition from, founding Scentbird to the next step. How did that come about?
So, for me, it was very organic in the sense that I've always loved helping companies, particularly early stage companies. I love that sort of helping the trajectory, that early stage of like figuring out your product, figuring out your acquisition channels, figuring out your customer. That's what I love to do. And so it really started because I was doing a ton of advising, a lot helping out companies. And while I started to advise them, and I will say it's not a coincidence that the people I tended to spend a lot of time and energy on are diverse. I sort of feel like the white guys have enough white guys helping them out. The rest of us need more help. So that's kind of one of my philosophies. It's all good for them, but they've got enough. I want to help everybody else. And for me, it started with doing advising, meeting great founders, seeing where their opportunities were. I've seen a lot from the experience of being an operator, the experience of building Scentbird from scratch. So I had a lot of experience that I can share. And from there, I actually left Scentbird and became a partner at a fund called 54 Ventures. But I was also doing angel investing personally. And what I realized is, I was doing small checks and my personal balance sheet can only go so far. And there were so many great opportunities. And that's why we started to think about Red by Capital and why we sort of transitioned into a fund. But it's really, I think that there's different types of venture capitalists. There are people who are more, pure finance and have been investors their whole life. And then there's people like me who have been operators and built businesses. And from there, want to help others build businesses and bring in their expertise. So, it's just different approaches.
Rachel, what percentage of venture capital goes to, minorities, Latinas, women? Do you know any of those statistics off the top of your head?
Yes, and they're pretty shocking. So basically, 97% of venture dollars go to white men. It's that staggering. Only 3% go to female founders or minority founders. And, I think the problem, and what's really shocking is that, last year with Black Lives Matter, with the Me Too movement, there was so much conversation. But sadly, the numbers didn't get much better. Actually, the numbers were worse. A lot of it had to do with COVID and people sort of, hunkering down and going back to what they knew and what they were most comfortable with. But that was actually not good for minorities, for Latinas, for Latinos, for African Americans, for women. It actually was very challenging for us to raise money. And, I think there's a couple of pieces that you need to think about of like, how does because I do think that, look, number one, I think that I start from the opinion that people do have good intentions, that people do want to help. They don't all know how to help. And number two, I think they're financially motivated. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. And, if you show those opportunities, people will jump on board. But there are a lot of very systemic challenges in venture. I mean, starting from the fact that, I will tell you that probably about half the time I'm talking to a founder, they'll say, well, you're the first woman I've talked to. You're the first Latina I talked to. And it's not surprising if 97% of venture capitalists are men. Yeah, they don't get to talk to a lot of Latina women. In fact, Latina general partners represent 0.1%. So we're like basically a rounding error of general partners. And so, for me, one of the things that I think is very important is diversifying not just the founders and the companies, but also the allocators, right? Who's actually doling out that money? I think the number was in the, I can't remember the number, but it's something like 1.3% of asset allocators are women. So, I mean, the numbers are tiny. I think that bringing diversity to both sides, just like if you went to Stanford, a lot of people from Stanford. If I'm a woman and I'm a Latina, I know a lot of women. I know a lot of Latino founders. I know a lot of diverse founders. I think there's just that natural diversity that you bring based on who you are. And that's really important to do in diversifying venture.
So on that note, especially because you brought up Stanford, I want to know what your view is on representation in leadership, not only in venture, but at universities, at large corporations.
What's my view of representation?
Representation in leadership specifically.
So, I think that obviously there's a lot of room to grow. There's very little representation. And I think the part that just breaks my heart is how little, particularly Latinos, it's such a tiny representation. So I would say that's number one, the fact that the numbers are so shockingly low. The second point, and it's interesting because I had some conversations, is I think that right now what's happening is like, there's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of conversation at the university, at the foundation level, but there needs to be action. There needs to be real dollars put behind diverse founders, behind diverse asset managers. There's just a lot of, it's kind of like, to quote Elvis Presley, a little less conversation, a little more action. That's exactly what we need.
Oh, I love that. I've never heard anyone use that. That is so good. I always just say,
a little more.
Put your money where your mouth is, right?
Yeah. I mean,
And it helps the bottom line too, like, what have we got to lose?
Well, it's interesting because I see that there are so many programs, so many mentoring programs and advice and help being thrown at minority founders. And that's great. But what they really need is funding. They want to go build businesses, right? And these programs cost money. It's not but where you're allocating that money and what impact is that really having? I think that's a fair question to ask.
And how much impact can you have if there aren't going to be dollars coming down the road? You can have the greatest company, the greatest idea, the greatest team, the greatest founder. You can have everything. But if you can't get capital, what can you do?
It's very hard to build businesses that way.
I've run into so many female founders, especially Latinas, who have that issue. We could go on about that all day, but what can we do about it, Rachel?
So, I think that I'm optimistic. I think that on the one hand, I think that businesses are starting to realize that the demographics are changing, that there is a huge financial opportunity. And so I do think that the world will slowly start to change. I think as Latinas, being smart, being hardworking, building those businesses, having those conversations, talking about it. I think that as you start to see a little more diversity on the asset manager, asset allocation, people like myself will be naturally more open and so have better networks that are more diverse. So, I think it's unfortunately not going to be fast, but I think it's a good move for everybody, both from a societal perspective, but from a financial perspective as well.
So what about all of these, especially the Latinas out there who, they're entrepreneurs, they want to take their business to the next level, or, the future Latina VCs out there? What advice do you have for them?
I think that be smart, know your numbers, be prepared. I do think that to the point of, a lot of conversation, you're still going to, you're still going to be that Ginger Rogers who does everything backwards and, does everything that Fred Astaire did, but does it backwards in heels. Like, that is just the reality that you're going to have to embrace. And so as much as we can talk, as much as we can ask for better, situation, I think part of it is being prepared, being extra prepared, know your numbers, build successful businesses, think about your profitability. If you're a founder, start building, start showing traction. And if you're an investor, start showing your unique access, start showing have a very well thought out thesis. How are you going to construct your portfolio? How are you going to think about the businesses? I think in the end, it does come down to, if you can show the opportunity, there's a little bit of greediness, but that's really what's going to change things.
So a lot of people in the community who would love to do these things, they look at the things that you've accomplished and they think, I can never have that. I have this background, or, whatever excuse or reason that it may be. So I know even like the Ivy League, oh, I don't have an Ivy League behind me. I don't have a master's degree. I don't have this. I don't have that. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, I am slowly optimistic. I do think the world is changing. I think there are more and more funds that are opening up in the last couple of months that are looking at underestimated founders, that are looking for founders that don't have traditional backgrounds. So there are opportunities. It's super competitive. There's not a lot. So you're going to have to work really, really hard, but there are opportunities. And I think, fake it till you make it, go build it, go do it. I don't want to underestimate how hard it is, but I do think that having that drive and starting to show results is really what's going to change things.
So what does a more equitable future look like, not only for, underestimated individuals, but for society at large?
I think that what's really interesting, as I said, is that it's not just that it's the right thing to do. It's that it's the new world. It's where society is going. It's the people that are going to be, if 30% of Gen Z are Latinos, then that's our future. And so I do think that building a more equitable society is not just about doing the right thing, but it's sort of the power of what's coming next. Again, I don't think it's going to happen fast. I don't think it's going to be easy, but I do think it's going to happen. That's really how I think about it.
It is going to happen, and people like you are making it happen. So I definitely want to thank you for everything that you do every day for founders, for Latinas, for women, for society. You are tremendous, and for your constant support on Twitter. I love you and appreciate you.
Thank you. Listen, I have kids. I'm raising, it starts with that, right? Like, we all have children. We all think about, what, I think there's a big part of it that is the mission of, like, what world are we creating next? And I think that's one of the things I love the most about venture, is that we're thinking about the future. We're thinking about what's coming next. And I think a lot about building opportunities for a better world.
And that is what we will make together because of women like you. So thank you so much. A better world for everyone. Rachel, if there's one thing that you want people to walk away with from this interview today, what would you like them to have in their minds?
I think it's like, it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be fast, pero sí se puede. And I do think that you're going to have to work harder than everybody else. That's just the reality. You're going to have to prove yourself. I wish it wasn't, but that's the reality. But I do think there's such potential in the Latino community. And I think that sense of empowerment, that sense of, like, don't ask for permission. Go do it. Go build it. Start building traction. Start building things. And good things will happen. I think that's really important. I think we are... And look, a lot of it is good reasons, right? A lot of us came without resources. A lot of us don't have wealthy families that can support us. And so entrepreneurship is a very hard route. But I think sort of having that drive and that grit, and yeah, you have to be a little bit, I guess, irrationally optimistic. That's what I would leave. Like, sí se puede, keep at it, and look out for support. Build your community, build your network, build your support system. I think that's very important. Find your champions.
Sí se puede. And Rachel, if people want to connect with you, learn more, or even, connect with you as an investor or as a founder, where can people find that information?
I think the easiest is Twitter. I'm R10Brink1 or on LinkedIn. I think those are probably the easiest ways to get to me.
Oh, well, I love that. So anyone who is not familiar, please check Rachel out. Also, check out Red Bike Capital. Thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here. This was a great conversation.
Well, I enjoyed it, and I'm sure the whole audience is enjoying it as well. When I say we, we're just going to speak on behalf of all of us. Well, thank you. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. The Latino Pittsburgh Digital Speaker Series is an initiative of the Pittsburgh Metropolitan Area Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Its goals are to share relevant information, inspire growth, and foster opportunity. Speakers and workshops include community leaders and members, as well as other individuals and programs that have a positive impact on not only the Hispanic community, but the Pittsburgh region at large. We hope to see you guys next week. If you're interested in becoming a speaker, please email chamber@pmahcc.org or check out our website for all the new programs we're launching and our upcoming events. Hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye.